to call anarcho-capitalists libertarians for the rest of this video. Now let's determine whether economics is morally neutral or just a reflection of society.
Okay.
One argument I hear floating around occasionally, which always more or less goes implicitly understood by libertarians, is the notion that markets are morally neutral and that they are simply a reflection of the...
No. The argument is not that markets are morally neutral. We morally do endorse free markets. The point is that economics is a value-free science. Economics does not attach moral norms anywhere. So, immediately, he's fucked up the statement.
Existing state of society and its prevailing moral beliefs. Mintus Wave recently made a video where he aimed to challenge the discourse surrounding woke capital, and his conclusion was that the market simply reflects the prevailing socio-political attitude. Therefore, corporations going woke is not a consequence of political economy, rather it is simply an artifact of governments passing DEI laws and implementing progressive policies. Of course, to say such a thing is more or less to dodge the debate entirely. Exponents of the idea of woke capital argue that it is not necessarily the case that capital has become woke because woke ideas are floating around.
When's he going to tell us where economics introduces moral norms? When's he going to do that? He hasn't signposted any such thing yet. When's he going to do that?
In the either, but rather the incentive structure of capitalism results in corporations adopting progressive ideas. The funny thing is, Mintus Wave doesn't actually dispute this because he acknowledges that corporations engage in progressive advertising in order to make increased profits. However, he is unwilling to concede that the progressive idea...
Cart, meet horse. You appear to be backwards, unfortunately. Do you know why businesses are able to make a profit by engaging in, like, Pride Month advertisements? Because that is the prevailing philosophy, and they've got to follow that, or else they go out of business. It's not that this is inherent. It will all... If you're in a society that thinks progressivism is abhorrent, you're certainly not going to make a profit by doing that. And so where... Is that where he's going to try and sneak in? That economics does have a moral norm, and that moral norm is progressivism, because it's more profitable to be a progressive. Is that the structure of his argument coming up? Oh, Jesus.
Ideology is tied up with liberalization of markets. Instead, it must be the fault of governments, and imposition by the left of progressive ideology on an otherwise axiologically neutral market. Now, I think there is some truth to the claim that markets are axiologically neutral in businesses. If Walmart sold George Floyd action figures or something, they would face a heavy backlash from progressive and anti-fascist forces, which would reduce their revenue and result in progressive shoppers and suppliers choosing other retailers. So companies have to morally regulate what they sell and what messages they amplify so as to not offend consumer demographics. I believe this is sort of what was happening with the whole Steam censorship controversy. However, that isn't the whole story. Markets may be, in the short term, apparently axiologically neutral to the point that they have a sort of Overton window of values, but in the long term, they're nonetheless trends and the sort of values that market-driven societies tend to adopt, which cannot be attributed to the government or the left. In the first place, we have to note that market societies have trended away from the bourgeois values of early modernity.
Does this guy like progressives or not? Because he keeps spouting progressive talking points every fucking argument. Like, does he like progressives? I don't get it.
Despite the relative absence of the left as a major political force, as well as a...
The relative absence of the left as a major political force. That is what I'm supposed to swallow here. That the left has been relatively absent as a major political force. Do you think that's correct, viewer? I don't think I have to. You can think throughout your own life on if you think that's that sounds accurate to you.
General consensus in governments around bourgeois values. An obvious example of this is the introduction of women to the workforce, which began as early as the 18th century. Before then, men in non-agricultural locales were expected to be the sole breadwinners, and working women were considered to be degraded by their occupation, since they lost their ladylike qualities of subtlety and non-engagement in exerting activity. After the Industrial Revolution and the advent of capitalism proper, this expectation began to gradually fade, and it became normal for working-class women to work in factories and workshops, as well as for women.
Who cares about any of this? None of this is pushing him an inch closer to his thesis that economics is not a value-free science. Not 1 inch. He's just rambling about irrelevant historical minutiae. Who gives a shit?
Women to become real estate moguls. The upper crust of the bourgeoisie held on to the privilege of strict gender roles, which is a sign that this transformation in gender expectations was not a consequence of any social...
Yeah, this guy might think that he's not a progressive, but he absolutely is. He's making all these Marxist arguments, and now he's applying the Marxist class theory to gender relations, which, if you're not aware, is explicitly the progressive program. The progressive program is what? Intersectionalism. It's taking Marxist class theory, applying it to all these different class differences, and looking at the intersection of all those. It's race Marxism, and gender Marxism, sex Marxism, and all the other types of possible Marxism you can generate. That's what progressivism is. This guy is a progressive.
Geopolitical change, but rather simply a result of political economy. The expanded scale of commodity exchange and the equalization of the labor power of men and women through the advent of machinery created the right conditions for women to become a useful and productive part of the labor force. The asymptotic nature of the profit motive.
Asymptotic. This is why I'm telling this guy to, like, lay off the big words. Like, you might have read it, but you didn't hear it. Let's just put it that way.
Incentivized growth over all else, and since half of the labor force had previously not been working, it made rational sense to finally introduce them into the economy. The same profit motive is behind much of what people call woke capital. The need for cheap labor, not just expansive consumption, drives a lot of mass immigration, and with mass immigration comes the need to instantiate pluralist attitudes among the public, such that we do not face serious racial or ethnic conflict. Additionally, the expansion of markets enhances profits, and so we also see efforts to reach out to previously neglected demographics, such as transgender people.
Glup Shadow for $10 is saying, when this guy said he was third positionist, I thought he'd be national syndicalist, corporatist or something. That'd be interesting. No, this guy is just a chutted out Marxist. Yeah, I'm not sure what exactly is third position about what he's saying here. I assumed he meant that he was a fascist or something. But this is third positionism. Okay, for a little quick history lesson to the fucking history master over here. Third positionism, it was framed as a third position between capitalism and Marxism. That is what third positionism means. Namely, things like fascism, National Socialism. They're supposed to be a different sort of thing to these two, Jewish beliefs, or whatever it is these people believe. Marxism is not a third positionist ideology.
People, homosexuals, and other minorities. Something like inclusive representation is also driven by a desire to expand marketable demographics. Game companies want to market to women because hitherto the vast majority of gamers have been men. If half of the population is not buying your games, then you're losing out on a vast amount of profit. Therefore, companies have aimed to include women in games as protagonists or as important characters, simply in an effort to convince them to buy games as well.
I wonder if any of this might at all be impacted by the fact that under US civil rights legislation, companies are literally legally required to discriminate against white straight men. They're literally legally required under US law to have Marxist values. I wonder if that might be even a remote influence on any of this happening. Perhaps even, maybe just a slight influence there on the adoption of Marxism. The fact that they'll get sued if they don't adopt Marxism. Just a thought.
The political economy of capitalism is progressive rather than neutral or reactionary. It revolutionizes everything it touches. As Marx said in the Communist Manifesto, the bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his quote-unquote natural superiors, and has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment.
Like, again, he's doing this thing with the quote where he, puts an EQ on it. I do the same thing, but I do it consistently. This guy just randomly tosses it in for, some quotes, but not all quotes. It's very confusing. Very confusing.
It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless indefeasible chartered freedoms, has set up that single, unconscionable freedom, free trade. In one word, for exploitation.
Anyway, I'm gonna go take a piss. I'll be right back. Hello. Stream Deck, but you still using the BRB? Yeah, I mean, it works. What can I say? You guys think Liquid Blue could become white one day? Well, unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, I am a brother. British, as we know, are descended from Cheddar Man. He was a black man, so the Brits are African American, unfortunately. So, I can never be white. It's a shame, but it's just an incontrovertible fact. I should probably also fill up my water. I have to go BRB again. I forgot to do that. Apologies, let's just do another quick BRB. Hello. I see this guy's fucking quoting Marx for some ungodly reason. Let's continue.
Veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substituted naked,
Yeah, I'm selling piss fries.
shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. The other question is whether economics as a science is morally neutral. Proponents of
The other question, that was the that was the question. You just didn't answer it.
capitalism, like libertarians, seem to think that economics is a neutral science and that free markets are as natural a fact as gravity or evolution.
No, again, that's not the claim. The claim isn't that economics is morally neutral because free markets are a natural fact like gravity. Clearly they aren't. We don't have them. It's that the analysis of a hampered versus unhampered market and all the other insights you get from economics, they do not depend upon and they do not imply ethics on their own. Now, you can use an economic argument to show, like, well, this would be more productive, and we know from ethics that production is good. You could have an argument like that, but economics itself is not concerned with moral arguments. This is pathetic. This is fucking pathetic.
Thomas Sowell put it, free market economics are just basic economics. The reality is that all markets must first be constructed. The growth of capitalism was facilitated by colonialism, which was obviously driven by governments.
Okay, so yeah, he's just doing Marxist theory of history, dialectical materialism. How is this guy a fucking third positionist? I don't get it. He's just doing Marxism, the whole goddamn video. In fact, no, it's not the case that free markets depend upon the previous cycles of history or whatever the fuck. And that would have absolutely no bearing on economics, even if that were the case. It would have no bearing on economic theory. Economic theory would be completely agnostic towards that. And still go, well, the free market system, it yields a higher level of productivity than this previous system. That has nothing to do with ethics. Nothing, not one thing to do with ethics.
The first stock markets were established in state-owned companies, the British and Dutch East India companies. Enclosure of commons and the commodification of land was facilitated by governments,
All irrelevant. None of this is relevant towards the thesis.
etc. The basic reality is that capitalism is not a natural fact, but rather a construction.
Again, let's say you have to go through all of these steps in order to construct capitalism. Let's say that's true. How does this evidence the claim that economics is not a value-free science? How does it evidence that? Show me where in economic theory you have to introduce moral evaluation. Show me that. That's what you need here.
And because it is a construction, it cannot be morally neutral. It always reflects the biases and preferences of its proponents. Libertarians prefer mass and scale over moderation and quality. They prefer material self-interest over immaterial values. They prefer exchange value over use value. In fact, the whole of capitalism can be reduced to the instantiation of a private property economy based on exchange value. It is these
I think we should just sit with that for a moment. Give it room to breathe. Try to calm our collective headaches. And now we can continue.
preferences which are behind advocacy for capitalism, and because we can have a number of other systems: feudalism, distributism, corporatism, socialism, anarchism, communism, and so forth, it's not obvious that capitalism is a morally neutral and natural fact like evolution or gravity. Because economics is not morally neutral, we need to match the kind of economic system we prefer with the kind of society that we want. Libertarians are, as a rule,
This guy's Natty Bud Light. You can find the link to his video in the description. Is he going to clarify? I do not have high hopes that this guy will clarify one time in this video.
in favor of the small proprietor society, where each man is a self-sufficient business owner, and we have as few wage laborers as possible. They are in favor of individual autonomy. But as Bertrand de Juvenel has said, that kind of society is impossible under capitalism. Libertarians turn into securitarians once they have enough wealth, and as a consequence, they establish monopolies and enclose resources, making it either economically onerous or impossible to carve out a spot as a small proprietor. Of course, libertarians will say monopolies can only exist with government force, but that's wrong, and I will discuss that argument later. Now let's get into the question of national capitalism. Not all anarcho-capitalists are nationalists, and in fact, the vast majority of them...
He still hasn't made any evidence to support the thesis. He just repeated it and is now moving on to more unsupported claims. Yeah, he just... Yeah, we need Zulu rage cam every time he does something that pisses me off. He's not done anything. Well, as Bertrand de Juvenel says, this doesn't give us the proof of the thesis that economics, in fact, requires moral valuation. I understand why people wanted me to watch this. This is absurd. Absolutely fucking absurd. And yeah, narco-nationalism is what he's going into now. You know, I was misled to believe by the title of this video that he would be responding to every ANCAP argument. I guess I was wrong.
seem to be perfectly fine with immigration, since under the NAP and without the existence of a state, and thus the non-existence of borders and border enforcement, there's no mechanism to stop it. However, there are more conservative libertarians who are nationalists in the sense that they want ethnically homogenous communities to exist. These are mainly exponents of Hans Hermann Hoppe and his idea of covenant communities. They believe that not only is nationalism compatible with capitalism, but also that only capitalism can truly be nationalist by way of creating economic incentives that drive agents to act in the nation's best interests. This, however, is a terrible misunderstanding of the political economy of capitalism. Adam Smith, in The Wealth of Nations, stated that merchants do not respect borders. The merchant is, as a rule, a cosmopolitan person who seeks wealth and opportunity wherever it arises. Capitalist society is not a society of small proprietors, as libertarians envision, but rather it is a society of the merchant and the mercantile mentality in which profit supersedes all prior values, particularly nation and identity.
Profit supersedes all values. Okay.
Capitalism militates against market actors from adopting rigid identities for the simple reason that only flexible identities are extensible enough to allow them to reach new markets and expand their commerce.
Can you count the number of quotes? I don't know if I can count that high.
Commerce localized to only a small local area, or localized only to a specific race or ethnicity, would entail a mitigation of the profit motive, which in praxeological terms is irrational and would not actually occur.
He says he's well read on this stuff. Presumably, he knows about psychic profit. That is the claim being made by praxeology. Let's bear that one in mind, see if that's what he ends up going for.
If the profit motive, which is the fundamental underlying reason why people establish businesses, and if one were to accept a cap on profits, one would not have an incentive to grow and thus no incentive to engage in business at all. Anarcho-capitalists themselves often...
One has no incentive to start a business because there's going to be some limit to the amount of profitability you can make. So it's better to just not have the business at all. Am I picking that up right? Did I miss something here? That is utterly asinine. I think Jeff Bezos is probably slightly better off having Amazon than not having Amazon. Just a teensy little bit. Zulu just looks sad at this point. Yeah, it's taking it all out of me. Taking it all out of me. Luckily, we got some brand new super chats from Man v Cake for $3 Australian. Thank you very much. Isn't profit and value almost synonymous in ANCAP? So, within the Austrian theory of economics, to profit is to gain some value. And then FV Staggle, HG3DP for $5 US. Thank you very much. I have no idea. I have no fucking idea what this guy is talking about, because he's talking about everything and nothing in particular at the same time. Pure ADHD. There's no substance here. It's just rambling. I think this video would actually, it's one of the very few videos that would be improved with an editing pass by ChatGPT. It would have the ChatGPT structure in there, but at least maybe some of this bullshit could get cut down just a tad.
In fact, raised this point when confronted with the question of how stateless societies would deal with the phenomena of racism, segregation, or discrimination. Their answer is that discriminatory attitudes militate against profit, and so proprietors would not...
Whoops-a-daisies, he did not integrate the point of psychic profit. Whoops, he failed to do that, so kept that in mind there, and it was important to do so, as he thinks profit just means money. That's what he thinks.
Act in such a manner. As the saying goes, capitalists know only one color, which is green. In modern capitalist societies, we see this phenomenon in action with regard to the effect of market incentives on immigration policy. Immigration brings both cheap labor and a mass of potential consumers, which can be marketed toward, so capitalists lobby in favor of mass migration to grow the economy. Most of the GOP had, before Trump, supported immigration, such as the infamous Gang of Eight, which included Ted Cruz. Even after Trump, the GOP continues to support immigration as long as it is legal and selective. However, in actual reality, they've either overlooked immigrants who are part of the labor force, such as illegal immigrants who work in agriculture, or have signed bills designed to grant them amnesty